Hi everyone, I hope you're well. Do let me know in the chat function if you can hear me or not. It's lovely to be here again for our third YouTube Live in our series of overcoming your fear of English. Do let me know if you can hear me and we'll make a start. I hope you've all had a lovely week as well. The weather has been glorious and I hope you've all enjoyed it. At least in Paris it's been lovely. I hope it's been good for you as well. Okay, hi everyone. Hi Gwenelle, Nicola, Valerian and Soziuk, whose name I unfortunately can't pronounce very well. Hi and a warm welcome to you all. So for those of you that are new this evening, this is a Sector-long free English lesson. We are an English school and we provide English lessons 100% funded by CPF, and we run a weekly YouTube Live on something that's interesting and useful for French people to learn. So a big welcome to anybody that is new this evening. It's lovely to have you here. This is our series of 5, Overcoming Your Fear of English, episode 3, in which we're going to be tackling some of the biggest hurdles in learning a second language and ultimately to give you the tools to feel confident when you speak English. In this week's YouTube Live, we're going to be exploring a challenge that I'm sure many of you can relate to, and many learners of English do struggle with this. It's what to do when you don't understand. As English learners, of course, that might happen fairly often. You might mishear something, you might not know what's going on. So in this YouTube Live, we're going to be looking at some key vocabulary and phrases to help you best manage situations when you don't quite understand what's going on. Some motivational tips to sort of make you feel motivated when speaking English and not to worry so much if you don't understand everything. And also we'll be looking at some alternative ways to say, can you repeat that? Because of course, as we all know, we can't always rely on one phrase when we don't understand something. So without further ado, I will start my PowerPoint for you and we'll dive straight into some content. So, starting with part 1. Who here struggles to understand native English speakers? Or do you feel a little bit ashamed if you don't understand native English speakers all the time? Do let us know on the chat if speaking English and worrying about not being understood or not understanding concerns you. Do let us know. First things first, not understanding something first time is really nothing to be ashamed of. Sometimes even 2 native English speakers struggle to understand one another. I personally have been in many situations in which I have to double check something or clarify that I've understood something that someone has told me, and that's between 2 English speakers. So you have to be kind to yourself and remember that if English speakers sometimes get confused what each other are saying, the likelihood is you might also get a bit confused in conversation too. This is particularly true between US and UK speakers of English. We have many different words for different things, which means sometimes our English gets a little bit lost in translation. So you're absolutely not alone when it comes to struggling to understand someone, as we do as well. I often struggle to understand American speakers just because our vocabulary is a little bit different. And the following video highlights exactly what I mean by that. So it's a British comedian, Michael McIntyre, talking a little bit about the differences between US English and UK English, and Michael McIntyre is from Britain.
The thing about Americans that I've thought about the language is that they say they speak English, but they've had to change it to make them understand it more. Go with me on this because I've thought it through. They've changed some of the words. So they've taken the English language, but they've looked at some of it and they thought, no, I think we need a little bit more explanation here, okay? That's my American accent. So things like pavement. So they can't work with pavement, so they've changed it to sidewalk. Yeah. They needed more information. They needed to know where they were going to be walking so that they wouldn't get run over.
So I didn't think of that.
Pavement, sidewalk. So I think there must have been a period of time where they ran with the word pavement, but they kept getting hit by cars. So they changed it to sidewalk. Now bear with me here, John, because I've thought this through. Yes. Bin, the word for bin. In American, waste paper basket. Yes. They needed to know what to put in it. They needed to know that not only it was paper, but waste paper, and that it goes into a basket. It's not just any paper. They kept throwing away fresh paper for a period before they introduced the word waste paper basket. You see, it's like they need instructions. Glasses for your eyes, they call them eyeglasses. They needed to know where to put them on their face, because they used to have glasses and they would put them on their thighs and they would put them on their feet and they would say, I can't see any better with the glasses. And then somebody went, no, they're eyeglasses. Well, why didn't you call them eyeglasses?
Okay, so I hope that video has made you feel a little bit better about your English and highlighted that even sometimes native English speakers struggle to understand one another. So, going forward, what should you do when you don't understand? So I've got 3 top tips for you this evening, which I hope will make you feel motivated and also more confident when you don't quite know what's going on in English. So tip 1 is don't go silent and stop the conversation. There's a really good expression in English which is called like a deer or like a rabbit in headlights, meaning that you're so frightened you totally freeze up and you can't respond to what someone has just said to you. Often this is a result of feeling a little bit nervous, so try to relax and remember that not everybody understands something straight away. I'll copy and paste that phrase for you because it's quite a nice phrase to keep in mind, like a deer or like a rabbit in headlights, meaning to freeze up in conversation. So you can use either animal, a rabbit or a deer, both work. Tip 2 is don't pretend you have understood something, if you have not totally understood it. I myself have been at many events in French, and I've sat at the event and I've nodded along at the table at the dinner party, pretending that I know what's going on. Perhaps you've been in a similar situation where you nod along and you laugh when everybody else laughs. However, you end up feeling a little bit isolated because actually the reality is you're not following the conversation and it's become a little bit too tricky. And over time, I now realise that the best thing to do is to tell people when you don't understand. That's totally okay if you're not following a conversation. Let people know and they can speak slower. Make sure you don't feel isolated in conversations because that's when we get afraid of speaking English rather than embracing the learning opportunity in front of us. Tip 3 is don't be afraid to ask someone to repeat something. So this is a bit of a follow-up from tip 2. It's totally okay to ask someone to rephrase something. No one's perfect, and sometimes people speak too fast or they have a really thick accent. There's a lot of English accents out there, some difficult UK accents and difficult US ones, and the Australian one is completely different to all the above. So don't be afraid to ask someone to repeat something if you haven't totally understood. I guarantee that most native English speakers are so impressed that you're even able to communicate in a second language, which is actually something a lot of native English speakers are unable to do. The majority of my friends in the UK and a lot of native English speakers only speak English. So remember that when you're learning English, that it is your second language and it's totally okay not to fully understand anything. So now we've gone through some motivational tips which I hope will make you feel a little bit more confident in English. Let's have a look at some ways we can tackle this problem of not understanding. So this brings me to part 2 of our YouTube Live, which is what to say when we don't understand. So we've got 2 types of scenario that could occur in English. We've got formal English and informal English. Formal is sort of a polite way to tell someone that you didn't understand. This could be in an office or when you're talking to a client, when talking to a customer, or even if you're talking to potentially a scary mother-in-law. It's all the situations in which we need to use a polite or a politer tone of English. So I've got some examples written up on the PowerPoint behind me, and we'll go through them one by one, and I'll also give some examples when it's best to use them. So on the left-hand side, we've got the formal word or phrase, and on the right, we've got the definition. So starting out with pardon or sorry, that's your shortest way to indicate that you haven't heard someone the first time that they've said something. So if someone tells you something and you haven't quite caught on what it was they've said, you can simply say pardon or sorry, which are both equally very polite ways to let the speaker know that you didn't quite catch what they said. Slightly more polite is, excuse me, could you repeat the question, please? Of course, the word question could be replaced with sort of anything. So, excuse me, could you repeat what you were saying, please? It doesn't have to just be question. And this is a polite way of asking for something to be repeated. We've also got a very polite way of not understanding something. You could say, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Would you mind speaking slower, please? Didn't quite catch that means that you didn't quite hear everything that was said. And would you mind speaking slower, please, is a polite way to ask someone to slow their pace when they're talking to you. See how we've put would you mind? It's a very polite, good way to start a phrase out. Of course, the person is not going to mind at all. However, it's a very nice way to introduce the fact that you haven't quite understood something. Slightly more direct is I didn't hear you. Feel free to let someone know that you didn't hear someone straight out. So you could say, I didn't hear you. Could you tell me that again, please? Or could you tell me this again, please? Could you tell me what you were saying again, please? And this is politely asking someone to repeat themselves when you didn't quite hear or understand what it was they said. Next on our list is I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you said. Would you mind repeating it? And this is to politely ask someone to repeat themselves when you didn't understand. And then the last two aren't questions as such, they're more statements that we can add to the beginning or an end of a sentence. So the first one is, so if I understood correctly. And this can go at the very beginning of a phrase. For example, if I said to you, the moon and stars are in the sky, and you didn't quite understand, you might pitch back what I just said. So you could say, so if I understood correctly, the moon and the stars are in the sky. Just to double check that you've absolutely understood 100% what that person was saying to you. You can also add a little sentence at the end of your statement, which is that right? So for example, we could say the moon and stars are in the sky. And if you wanted to double check that you'd understood that that's what I said, you could say the moon and stars are in the sky. Is that right? Just to double check comprehension and to make sure that both speakers are clear on either side. So that's some formal examples. Do feel free to use them, as I said, in the office, in polite situations if you're with like mother-in-law, father-in-law, family members where it's slightly more formal. These are all really useful. Pardon and sorry can also be used in everyday English as well. It's not overly polite to say pardon to someone. I say pardon all the time, even if I'm at home and not at the office. Again, sorry as well is not overly polite, so feel free to use that in sort of any everyday situation. Okay, so now we've gone through some formal examples. Let's take a look at some informal examples of telling people when we don't quite understand something. So informal is a more relaxed way to say when you don't understand situations. So it's often useful in everyday conversation, potentially with your friends, with people that you aren't necessarily trying to impress. I've got a mix of examples here which vary in the scale of how rude they are. As you may know, English is a very polite language. As a culture, we're always somewhat overly polite, so it's always best to try and pick the politest way possible. However, in some situations, if you're with your best friend, your brother or your sister, using a slightly more direct or impolite way of saying, I don't understand, or can you repeat that, is also acceptable. So it totally depends on the context. So on the left-hand side again, I've got some informal words and phrases, and on the right, I've got their definitions. And we'll run through some examples together, and do feel free to ask any questions in the chat as well. So our first example is sorry what? Of course, this isn't overly impolite, but it's used when you do not recognize the sound you just heard. So it's not necessarily that you didn't understand the meaning, it's more to do with the sound. So if someone has a weird pitch in their voice, or if the traffic is really loud and you didn't quite catch what it was they said, you can simply say, sorry what? And the person will know that they should repeat again what they have to say. A slightly more direct version of this is simply what on its own. If you haven't understood something, you can of course just reply and say what, which would indicate that you want them to repeat it. However, this can be interpreted as quite rude, particularly in English or UK culture at least. Saying what isn't particularly liked. However, if you're with your friends or potentially your brother or sister, as I said, sometimes using what is necessary. We also have come again with a question mark at the end, so come again, raising your voice at the end of again to indicate that you would like somebody to repeat something. So it's really useful if you want someone to repeat something, and it's often used in English slang. So again, this is something you'd use with people that you're familiar with. You wouldn't say come again necessarily to your boss or somebody that you were trying to impress, for example. The next two examples are quite sort of colloquial, specific examples to the UK and the US. The first one is you what, question mark. You what is a strange one. It can be interpreted as quite rude. It can mean, can you repeat that? However, it's very direct and it's not often used in conversation unless you're feeling potentially quite angry about something or you want to get your point across. It can also be used to show a sense of shock. So if someone says something shocking to you, you can say you what. If you would like them to repeat it, not because you didn't understand, but because you're so shocked about what they said, you need them to repeat it again to be sure that you heard correctly. It's not overly used in everyday English, however it crops up in series, in movies. It's something that you might hear now and again in the English language. Then we've got the American version, say what, or say what, I guess, in an American accent. This is a common expression in the US which can be used to express surprise, or it can mean, can you repeat that? So very similar to British English. If something is shocking and you want someone to repeat something because you're shocked by the information they've just told you, like my brother is getting a divorce and you can't believe what you've just heard, you might say what? Or you what? To get them to repeat that again because you feel surprised by it. The second to last one is pass that by me again, and that's quite a casual expression, again, to use between friends, family, and it basically you're asking someone to repeat something to you in a very sort of slang, familiar and relaxed way. So pass that by me again if you simply didn't quite catch what it was they said. And then lastly, similar to our formal English, we've got another way of repeating back something that's been said to you to check your comprehension. So, for example, if we take the same example, the moon and stars are in the sky. If you wanted to double check that you'd understood that and you were sure, you could say, so you're saying the moon and sun are, or stars, I think I said, the moon and stars are in the sky. And it's just a way of double checking. Often it can also be used if you're unsure, you believe the person fully as well. If you're a bit suspicious about the information they've just given you, it can also be used in that context as well. So you're saying she actually got a divorce, or so you're saying Trump actually faked COVID. Again, all question marks, none of that is true, of course. Okay, excellent. So now we've gone through some informal words. I've got a couple of nice idioms. So an idiom is a clever, little creative phrase, often unique to a country. So idioms you find in the UK might not necessarily exist in the US. They're often quite country specific. I've got a couple of ones definitely that I've seen in British English, which I'll share with you now. So on the left-hand side, we've got the idiom, and on the right-hand side, we've got the definition. You use an idiom in lots of situations, often more casual situations. It's informal. You might read it in literature. You might see it in a movie, on the radio, or listen to it on the radio, in a series. It's something that you might hear around you, but you might not necessarily say yourself. So we'll start off with, this is all Greek to me, which means this makes no sense to me. The idea is that Greek is a particularly difficult language to learn, so the idiom compares what it was you said to a difficult language, so this is all Greek to me. Another way of saying that is, this is all gibberish to me. Gibberish is not an official word in the dictionary as such. It's something we use in slang English to highlight that something is all nonsense to yourself, that it makes no sense to you. particularly if someone's told you something really complex, if it was like a very intense scientific debate or political debate which was out of your knowledge capacity, your understanding, you might say, this is all gibberish to me, it means nothing to me, it's nonsense. We've then got quite a sarcastic way to say that something actually isn't clear at all. So we've got, this is as clear as mud to me. And this, again, English people love a bit of sarcasm. We're comparing the clarity of something to mud. Mud is something that you find in the fields when you're growing plants. It's the earth, la terre, I guess, or le boue, potentially in French, which basically means, so this is as clear as mud to me, basically means it's not clear at all. And then we've got, I can't get my head around it, which is not particularly impolite. You could say in many contexts, which basically means I can't understand what it is that you are talking about. Okay, excellent. So now we've gone through informal, formal and idioms. We'll move on to part 3. I can see that I've got some questions on the chat, so I'll quickly go through those with you now. If you write like a deer means. Christelle has asked, could you write what like a deer means? It's a type of animal with the antlers. I can't remember the word in French, I apologies. Like a deer in headlights, or like a rabbit in headlights. That moment when a deer is hit with headlights, they freeze up like this, and they're unable to respond. So we have an expression in English which explains that sense of not knowing how to react to a situation, like a deer in headlights. Any other questions? Okay, excellent, great. Thank you for the translation of mud as well, Thesa. And Coach Marianne, I will try and speak a little bit slower so you can understand fully what's going on. Okay, so moving on to part 3 is over to you. I've got 3 questions. We'll start with question 1, of course. So, you are in a meeting with your colleague, Amy. She has just told you the goals of the week and you didn't quite understand her. How might you politely tell her, so a formal situation, that you didn't understand her? Has anybody got any examples that they could write in the chat of a polite way to say that you didn't understand what your colleague Amy just told you? Anybody know some polite ways we can say that you didn't quite understand her? Do feel free to post your thoughts in the chat, what you think it could be. Anyone got any ideas? Otherwise, I have a couple in mind that I'm more than happy to share with you. Francois says, sorry, could you... what the goals are. Very close, Francoise. You could say, sorry, could you redefine what the goals are, please? Matt says, could you please repeat? You can say it slightly more formal. Could you please repeat what it was you just said? Or could you please repeat that? Usually we have to have something after repeat, like a little word. Thesa says, sorry, could you repeat, please? Often we need to say that after repeat to indicate that you want them to repeat the phrase they said before. So, sorry, could you repeat that, please? I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Perfect, Anya. I didn't understand all. Could you please repeat it? Could you repeat, please? Yes, Christelle, you could say, I didn't understand all of what you just said. Or I didn't understand everything you just told me. Could you please repeat, Mary? Yes, a few spelling mistakes there, Mary. Could you please repeat? Nicholas has said, you speak slowly, please. Remember, we need to form it into a question. So could you please speak slower, or can you please speak more slowly? Some excellent examples. So I've got 3 here, which I'll share on the chat and also read out for you. So the first one is... I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand what you said. Would you mind repeating it? We've also got, I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Would you mind speaking slower, please? And then we've got simply, could you repeat that please, which I saw on the chat was said by a couple of you, so that's fantastic. Some really good examples from you all. Okay, heading over to question 2. You're in a meeting and Brian, your lovely colleague Brian, says to you, I need you to look over the marketing reports and get them back to Adrian by 6 p.m. on Thursday. How might you politely reformulate Brian's request to check that you understood it correctly? So remember those little phrases that we put at the beginning or at the end of a sentence? How could we politely double check that we've understood something? Anyone got any ideas? It's not a question in itself, it's more of a statement that we add to our sentence. Do feel free to share on the chat if you have any ideas at all. I have a couple up my sleeve if you're struggling. Evelyn's got a good example. Excuse me, could you tell me that again? And of course, if you want to be extra polite, we can always put a please on the end. An excellent example, Evelyn. Very, very good. Anybody else got any ideas? François says, you want to say, I need to look over the marketing reports. Very close, Françoise. By saying you want to say, you're almost telling them directly what it is you want them to say. I would rephrase it as, you want to say, I think I put, so if I understood correctly, you would like me to look at the marketing reports rather than being so direct with my phrase. And Thursday's put, I'm not sure, did you say on Thursday at 6 p.m? Yes, very good. And Christelle says, you need to look over the marketing reports. Did I understand well? Remember, you're talking about yourself, so I need to look over the marketing reports. Did I understand you well? Okay, I've got some examples here which might help you a little bit as well. Valerian has said, if I understand you, look me over the marketing reports. Very close indeed. We could put, so if I understood correctly, you would like me to look at the marketing reports and give them to Adrian on Thursday at 6 p.m. And as you notice, we've got the little beginning bit of the phrase. So if I understood correctly, you're double checking before launching into your sentence. And then lastly, we've got, you would like me to look at the marketing reports and give them to Adrian on Thursday at 6 p.m. Is that right? And adding this tiny is that right at the end of the phrase lets the speaker know, or the person you're talking to, that you would like to double check that you've totally understood what it is they were saying. But some very good examples from everybody. Really well put together phrases that are very, very polite indeed. Okay, and lastly, we'll end on a high. So what 3 tips should we keep in mind when we don't understand something in English? Can anyone remember how to make us feel a bit more motivated? Or has anyone got any other tips they might like to share with other people in the group today? What should we keep in mind when we don't understand something in English? Or what can we do when we don't understand something in English? Anyone got any ideas? What should we keep in mind? François says, don't tell you understand if you don't. Yeah, so don't say that you have understood if you don't understand. Yes. Maria says, to say you don't understand. Yes, so that's something we should do. We should say when we don't understand. It's always good to be honest and let people know when we don't quite know what's going on. Honesty is always the best policy. Any other final thoughts from anybody? Okay, I'll share the tips again with you. So tip 1 is don't go silent and stop the conversation. Be bold, be brave, it's okay not to understand. Tip 2, don't pretend to understand if you haven't understood, as Françoise correctly put. And tip 3 is don't be afraid to ask someone to repeat something. It's okay to say you don't understand. It's okay to ask, can you repeat that, in many different ways as we've looked through today. We've got some more examples that have come in. Not to be ashamed, exactly Thursday, you shouldn't be ashamed if you don't understand. Anya says to ask to speak slower. Yes, you can always ask people to slow down their pace. Many of my students ask me to speak slower. Rephrasing. Yes, Edward, that's a really good suggestion. You can ask people to rephrase a sentence if you would like them to repeat it, but in a slightly simpler way or a different way, which you think you'll understand better. You can always ask them to rephrase it. Okay, some really good examples from everybody. That brings me to the end of this week's YouTube Live, the third one in our series of Overcoming Your Fear of English. Next week will be episode 4, to be defined. Thank you so much for coming today, guys. It was lovely to talk to you all and sort of chat to you this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it and learned something new, and you feel a bit more motivated, a bit more confident, and less afraid of making mistakes or simply asking people to repeat something. If you haven't already, do like and subscribe to our channel, or do share our videos or our channel with your friends, your colleagues, your family. We've got a free lesson every week and we love to have you here. I wish you all a very, very nice week ahead, and I'll see you all next week as well. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.